True Crime Screening Room is a presentation of the Sherpa's podcast picks. Please keep in mind that some of the topics discussed might be too intense for younger or sensitive listeners. Even Jim, the podcast Sherpa, conducts some of these interviews while hiding under his desk. All while holding a stuffed mountain lion named Mr. Wubby.
Welcome to True Crime Screening Room, the podcast featuring interviews with creators who dedicate their work to unraveling true crime mysteries. We're now entering the investigation room in the Sherpa Chalet to meet your host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, rebels of the Sherpa-lution, and welcome to True Crime Screening Room. It is a side project of Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa, and that is me, Jim the Podcast Sherpa, coming to you from Sherpa-lu Studios here in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastia, and I know you guys out there love your true crime, and I do whatever I can to bring it to you. In these episodes, we get to speak to a lot of true crime authors, and this week's is a really fascinating one. I think you're really going to like it. His name is Daniel Zimmerman. He lives in Boston. He's written a book that was just recently released called Chason's Run. It is considered the Bonnie and Clyde story of Massachusetts. I got to know Daniel. He's got some really interesting connections to this story and another book that he's written as well. We talked about both of them. I think it made for a really fascinating conversation, and I think it's something you're really going to like. So why don't we just head on over to the True Crime Room here in the Sherpa Chalet and hear from Daniel Zimmerman, the author of Chason's Run. Hello there, rebels. We are here in the True Crime Screening Room. My guest today is Daniel Zimmerman. He's coming to us from Massachusetts. He has a brand new book, which I believe just came out today. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
It is called Chason's Run, and it is about Leroy Chasin, a man who escaped a Massachusetts prison with his pen pal turned wife and evaded capture for about 7 years. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Appreciate you having me on.
I was looking at your listing on Amazon, and as we were just saying, if you type in Daniel Zimmerman, you can find his books there. You
Correct.
did another book called Shots in the Dark, and you actually had a familial connection to the victims in one of your books, right?
Yeah, well, oddly enough, I have a little bit of, not familial, but a connection to the second book as well. Mm-hmm. It seems that crazy crime comes my way wherever I go.
Well, it's nice that you don't have to look too hard then.
No, I don't have to look too, I tell friends, they always ask where I get my ideas, and I say, just talk to a relative, and there it is. They hand me one. I've had one of those lives where I stumble across crime and punishment, I guess you could say. Not that I've been ever involved in any crime and punishment, but I've been fortunate enough to have stories of this type handed to me almost on a regular basis.
And you're by trade a sports writer, right?
No, actually, that's just a side gig. My trade has been over the last 5+ decades. First, I was an EMT, emergency medical technician, for a private ambulance service, which happened to serve, in addition to hospitals and nursing facilities in the area, also served the two major prisons in Massachusetts, Walpole and Norfolk. So
you can see where this is leading.
Yeah, so I kind of cut my teeth by going into these prisons on a regular basis, taking inmates who have been either sick or injured to hospital trips. And that was my first career. I started that as a 20-year-old as an EMT, and I did that for a couple of decades, and I got to near my 40th year, and I decided to make a change, and I joined a local utility here in Massachusetts, a gas company.
Okay.
And I was a supervisor who was responsible for overseeing gas leaks out on the street. And so in addition, obviously, I was writing these books, and I did a library talk about Shots in the Dark. And one woman in the audience raised her hand for a question. She said, so you're an EMT going in and out of prisons, which is pretty dangerous. you're a gas company supervisor dealing with gas leaks in the street, which is pretty dangerous, and you're interviewing mob figures and mafia guys. What do you do to relax and stay safe? Not very much. It seems like I'm always in the thick of it.
I think juggling chainsaws is the appropriate answer to that question.
Maybe that's my next career. Yeah, I guess you could say my side gig writing these high school sports stories, as you mentioned. That's probably one of the safer career moves on my part. But then again, there's always that foul ball that comes your way. So you just never know.
Do you end your columns with "Please don't kill anybody"? I really don't need to write any more true crime books.
Yeah, no. I just want a nice, quiet game. I'll take some notes. I'll go home. I'll write the story, and that's it. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell a little bit about the story about Leroy Chasin, so our listeners get the gist.
Sure. Well, Leroy Chasin was a murderer in the town of Quincy. He killed a 20-year-old kid in the town of Quincy during a brawl in a park. He had been sent there by a former cellmate to collect some money that was owed. The cellmate couldn't go himself because he was on the run. He had escaped from jail. So Leroy, his friend, former cellmate, he asked him, "Will you go to Quincy to this park and collect my money?" It was a drug deal.
Okay.
Basically a drug deal. So Leroy gets there and he gets in a bit of an argument with this gentleman, Kevin Rissett, and punches him in the face, knocks him on his butt. A lot of Kevin's friends came running to his aid, jumped on Leroy, and he pulled out a knife and stabbed two of them, one fatally.
Okay.
The 20-year-old kid, his name was Paul Melody. So off to prison he goes as a result for a life sentence, life without parole. And he was sent to MCI Walpole. MCI stands for Massachusetts Correctional Institute. That's how they call all their prisons here in Massachusetts. So it's MCI Walpole, which was notorious. It was a very tough prison, almost impossible to escape from. 18-foot walls, electrified barbed wire on the top of those walls. Just a very, very secure facility. And so he figured out the means on how to escape, that you can't escape while you're inside, but when you're on the outside, you have a better chance.
Right.
So he and his pen pal, who later married him while he was in prison, decided to make this escape, and they planned it and executed it during Labor Day weekend of 1982. Now, I generally try not to tell too much of the escape because that's the core of the story, and I like readers to anticipate that. So, but it was pretty interesting. It was well executed, well planned. They did have an accomplice. The accomplice was never captured. 50 years later, they still don't know who helped Mr. Chasin get away. But the escape did result in a 7-year run across the country. Basically 18 months to get to his final destination, which was Denver, Colorado. But most of the time he spent living in Denver as James Garrity. That was his fake name. He had all the credentials to fit that, with his wife, who helped him get out. And they lived a good life in Denver until a certain TV show was introduced to the general public by the name of America's Most Wanted. They decided in 1988 to do a feature on Mr. Chasin. And it didn't result in many leads. Nothing really came of that first broadcast. The second one, a year later, in 1989, did trigger some interest in some neighbors who recognized him. And they called the FBI, and the FBI took those tips from that TV show and investigated and found where he was living, and they set up a apprehension of Mr. Chasin. And it didn't quite go as he had planned. So I'll give you my connection to this story. Again, as an EMT, I was responsible for transporting these folks. Now, I was scheduled to work Labor Day weekend in 1982.
Okay.
But I had a girlfriend. Typically Labor Day weekend is a travel weekend. It's the last weekend of the summer.
Right.
We decided we wanted to go away. We decided to go to Montreal, Canada. So I approached one of my coworkers at the ambulance company, a Bobby Zamito. And Bobby and I made an agreement. He took the weekend. When I came back to work on Tuesday morning, I walked into the office to do my day, and Mr. Bobby came over to me and put his hand on my neck and started to strangle me. And
I wonder why.
And I said, Bobby, what's the problem? And he said, Zimmerman, I am never working for you again. There were other words, but I don't want to use them on your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for your restraint.
It was all in love. He was just kind of, sending a message. And I said, what happened? And he says, because I worked for you, I had a gun held on me and I could be dead right now. Bobby happened to be one of the people who transported Mr. Chasin to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And that triggered a chain of events immediately following that arrival at the hospital. So a funny little side story to that. So I missed the actual first transport of Mr. Chasin to the hospital that day. Years later, when America's Most Wanted decided to do a broadcast of what took place, obviously they do those reenactments.
Right.
So they visited the ambulance company. We were located in Norwood, Massachusetts. Knocked on the door and they said, we'd like to hire an ambulance and 2 EMTs to film the reenactment. And so the office manager says to me, he says, hey, Dan, you missed the first one. Why don't you do the second one? And I said, I really don't want to be associated with a guy like this Leroy Chasin. It's not my thing. Let somebody else do it. And so they picked 2 other EMTs and they did the thing. And not too long after that, they got substantial royalty checks. And I didn't.
Karma coming back to bite you, right?
Yeah, I guess you could say I struck out twice on that game. So
we should point out that when Chasin went into the hospital, he injured himself, right? So that's
yes. At the prison, what he did is he got a hold of a ballpoint pen, which isn't much of a weapon really, but he made it one, and stabbed himself 3 times in the abdomen, knowing that he would be bleeding substantially,
right,
and that the prison officials would send him to the hospital for treatment. And that was exactly true. Oddly enough, today, it took me 5 years to write this book. This afternoon, I actually spoke with one of the corrections officers who agreed to interview with me back in the day when I first started writing.
Mm-hmm.
I had a real struggle at that time getting a corrections officer to speak with me because there was so much embarrassment on their part.
Right.
They made a lot of mistakes that allowed this escape to take place. But this corrections officer was more than willing to talk with me. He had since retired. And basically when I said, aren't you worried about your colleagues being upset with you telling the story? And he said, no, I really don't give a crap. I'd love to tell you the story and let you use it for your book. So today I spoke with him and I said, you have, thanks again for the interview, and you have a complimentary copy on the way to you. So I put that in tomorrow's mail. And his interview really made the difference, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I could interview the 2 EMTs because they were coworkers, and I've known them for many years. But getting a corrections officer to tell what took place step by step was huge. He made a major difference in the story. I asked him, in addition to all that took place at the prison, as far as Mr. Chasin stabbing himself and being treated in the infirmary at the jail and being transported and so forth, I said, what was the key that resulted in his escape? And he says, Dan, I had to take a mean pee. He said, so when I went into the men's room while I was in there, bad things happened.
Wow.
Yeah. He admitted it though. He said, nature called and that allowed Mr. Chasin to make his escape.
Now, also, in addition to him getting himself into the hospital, the pen pal Kathleen?
Kathleen. Yep.
Yeah.
She was a woman from the town of Weymouth, which people familiar with Massachusetts, Quincy and Weymouth border each other. So it was very odd that Leroy committed his murder in Quincy and his future girlfriend and wife were from the next town, Weymouth. She was married, 6 children, and she had some troubles, drinking some drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And it eventually led to her husband divorcing her. He took custody of the children, and she went off on a very strange relationship. The way it began was that Chasin was in prison. He needed $500 to pay a lawyer for an appeal. And the way he asked for that $500, he put an ad in a newspaper asking for individuals to send him $1 each, hoping you would get 500 people to do that. And Kathleen was one of them. She sent them a greeting card with a $1 bill in it. And she provided her return address. He wrote back to her. They struck up a correspondence and literally fell in love through letters. And she started to visit him at the prison. And, the rest is history. They eventually, when he got to prison for the murder, she arranged for a marriage. They got married in a chapel at the prison. So they were actually married at the time of the escape.
Okay.
Husband and wife.
And she posed as a nurse in the hospital.
Yeah, she had all the stuff. It was very easy for her to do that because her profession, when she wasn't in a rehab somewhere, was a nurse's aide, nurse's assistant. She was trained medically, so she knew a lot of stuff.
Okay.
And that was one of the points that I learned from the corrections officer about the what made them another reason that the escape happened. Generally, when an inmate leaves one of the prisons anywhere in Massachusetts, it's a requirement that not only do they wear leg irons to keep their legs together, but they also wear what they call a belly chain. And it's just more or less a chain that wraps around from the back to the front,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're handcuffed to the belly chain.
Okay.
So that's usually pretty secure when they leave the facility and go to a hospital. But because Leroy's wounds were on his abdomen, the doctor at the hospital decided it would be hazardous to put the belly chain on that area and have it rubbing up against the wounds, causing more bleeding, causing more issues. So he ordered the corrections officers not to use the belly chain, not to handcuff him to him. So all Leroy had was the leg irons.
Okay.
And he did have range of motion as a result of that. Obviously, it was a shuffling motion because the chain is very short.
Right.
But motion, and he had his hands free, which aided him quite a bit. Yeah. So it's been said that Kathleen, she, because of her medical knowledge, when they were planning this, she instructed her husband Leroy to stab himself in the abdomen, because number one, it bleeds a lot. Number two, it generally doesn't lead to fatal results.
Right.
He would live. And she also knew that they likely would not put on a belly chain, leaving him somewhat having that freedom of movement when he needed it.
So once he was free from the prison, essentially, it was all laid out for him.
Yeah, well, when they got free of the prison, they got to the second getaway car. They did have an accomplice who gave them a second car. He parked it in a location where they knew where to get it. He left them money, change of clothing, and bolt cutters.
Oh, okay.
That was strong enough to cut the leg irons.
Right. Did they take hostages when they were escaping? No.
Nope. No. There was a gun battle.
Okay.
Leroy obviously had a firearm.
Because he smuggled it in, right?
Yes, and the corrections officer had a firearm. And there was a shootout in the parking lot of Norwood Hospital. As a matter of fact, it became after this event, it became kind of a tourist attraction. A lot of folks would come and take pictures of the holes in the concrete wall from the bullets, including myself.
Yeah.
I took pictures of them too. I was there all the time. I just put my camera in one of the ambulances, and one of my trips to the hospital, I was like taking pictures of the bullet holes from the big event, the one that I missed.
It's interesting that you were talking about Kathleen McDonald, saying that she obviously had a rough life, and she obviously had some problems, and
Yes.
that it got her romantically attracted to someone in prison. Because I remember there was a case, I believe it was in 2022, with somebody with a prison guard, right? It was with a female prison guard, and she helped him get out. Was it Casey White? I think his name was.
I wouldn't recall, to be honest, but that happens more often than you think. There's a lot of we used to call them prison groupies.
Uh-huh.
You'd see them all the time, going into the prison for assorted reasons, whether to read to the inmates, you name it. They would go in and visit. That was basically a hobby, to go to the prison and spend time with inmates who don't get to see anybody other than friends and relatives if they're coming to see them.
Mhm.
I'm aware of certain inmates that just don't get visitors. So yeah, they visit, they become groupies, they fall in love, and wouldn't be the first time. My first book had similar circumstances where a prison visitor, so to speak, fell in love with my character in that book.
Mhm.
And they eventually got married in the prison chapel as well. So it is fairly common, I would say. And the loyalty to some of these inmates. When I was in the first book, I was visiting my main character, Rocco Bolero, on a regular basis to do interviews.
Mhm.
And so I was always there for 2 years. I visited him Tuesday night and Saturday morning. So generally, when I would be going into the prison being processed in, the visitors that were with me were the same all the time. They would also go every Tuesday night, every Saturday morning. So I get to know some of these people, mostly women. Obviously, they're visiting the men, and the reasons behind it were just, it was hard to grasp
Mhm.
why they were staying loyal to somebody who might be incarcerated for his entire life, but they continued to make these visits and bring, and buy them meals in the prison. So there was a lot of that going on. It was very, very strange, but I guess admirable for these people to show loyalty.
Now, for Shots in the Dark,
Yes.
it was your aunt and your cousin that were killed.
Yes. My aunt was 21. My cousin was 2.
Okay, and you
When
were a kid when this happened.
I was also 2.
Okay.
My cousin Mark and I were the same age. We were both 2. I was a toddler.
Uh-huh.
And as a matter of fact, I have photos of the 2 of us together in the same baby carriage.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it was pretty unfortunate that they perished. A lot of people, when I tell them that I had such a strong connection to the story, being a relative, they say, they do the, oh, that's so sad. And yes, to a point, but also I was so young, I don't remember anything of that, what
Right.
took place. I grew up with the story. Obviously, family members would tell me, and then when it came time, I decided to write it. At an older age when I could understand a little better.
Mhm.
And the research for that book was absolutely amazing. I fully enjoyed it. I got to meet people that, if you sat down to a dinner table with some of these folks that I associated with, you'd be trembling the whole time.
Right. Okay.
They're mob guys.
Right.
I actually had dinner with a 2-year head of La Cosa Nostra, one of the bosses. Yes. And it was absolutely amazing. It was such a pleasure to talk to this man. And basically I wasn't afraid of any of them because I was doing something for one of them. They'd always say when I talk with them, you're doing a great thing for Rocco Bolero, telling his story and telling it the right way. Needless to say, I lost a few relatives of my own because they did not agree with my approach.
Right. That's what I wanted to ask you, because I figured that must have been hard, knowing what this man did, and you're trying to offer his perspective of it, regardless of the end result.
Well, actually, take that a step further. When I first decided to write the book, I was writing the story of Rocco Bolero, cold-blooded murderer who killed my relatives.
Right.
And then I went to visit him for the first time, and it was very odd. I'm in the visiting room at MCI Norfolk, which is a minimum security. He had been in so long that they dropped him down to minimum. And I'm standing in the waiting room, and obviously I knew what he looked like. He didn't know what I looked like. So when he came in out of the tiers and walked in, I stood up, kind of put up a hand so he'd know it was me. And he came over and gave me a hug. And I and I thought, here I am. What am I doing here? I'm in a prison. I'm hugging the man who killed my aunt and cousin. But it was literally 3 weeks that I had a complete turnaround. Complete turnaround. Rocco provided me with contacts on the outside, from police officers to attorneys. He mailed me stacks of documents, affidavits, just pure evidence that he did not do what they said he did. And I came to the conclusion that this man was wrongly accused, and he spent his entire life in prison. He died behind bars for a double murder that he did not commit. And I am 101% positive of that. And the readers who have read the book, who have gotten back to me about the story itself, all agree with me that I proved it beyond a doubt that Rocco did not do that crime. He triggered the events that led to the deaths. And he actually in prison admitted to me. He said, I am to blame to some point for triggering those events, for making this happen the way it did. He says, but I didn't shoot the bullets that killed him. Right. And he says, Grant, sure, I should have done 15, maybe 20 years for that. He says, but not my whole life. Rocco was very good at getting out of places too. Oh. It could have been Rocco's run. He escaped from two very difficult jails in Massachusetts. He escaped from a prison. They always brought him back though. He was good at getting away, but not good at staying away. So
that's an interesting way to describe a convict.
Yeah,
he got half the job done, but
exactly. But they always brought him back. Yeah, he was. We became friends. From prison, he introduced me to a lot of his family members. I became very close to those family members. His brother Billy and I would take our respective wives out for dinner once a month. Mm-hmm. His sister Lucy, I'd take her out to lunch frequently. The family would invite me to the annual cookout in Plymouth. They had a big cookout, and I was always invited. When Rocco passed away, the family approached me and asked me to do his eulogy, and I did. I stood up in that church and I read Rocco's eulogy in front of a church filled with gangsters, mob figures, ex-cons, and a lot of police officers who were showing their respect to the family. It was an interesting time.
I was going to say, at the very least, that probably must have been one of the most unusual places that you've ever been, considering all the things that you've been doing in your life so far.
Yeah, well, I mean, oddly enough, a year after I did the eulogy at this church, my daughter got married there, same church. So, I guess what comes around goes around. I ended up back in the same church. Yeah, it was an interesting run. Like I said, I had dinner with a gentleman. His name was Peter Lamone. He had gone to prison. He was framed by the FBI for a murder he did not commit, and he spent 33 years behind bars as a result. When he got out, the mafia made him boss out of respect. He spent 2 years doing that. Just a interesting guy. When I met with him, we're at the table. I would ask him a question for the book because he knew Rocco in prison. Mm-hmm. They were good friends. And I'd ask him a question, and then I'd follow that with, "Can I use this in the book, Mr. Lamone?" Yeah, of course. He says, "They're not going to put me back in jail." He actually, along with 3 others who were framed in this murder by the FBI, filed a lawsuit against the federal government for $100 million. And they won.
Wow.
They each got $25 million. And a funny story to that was, so at this dinner, Mr. Lamone says to me, "So when your book is done, are you going to have signings?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I'm going to have signings." He says, "All right, here's the deal. He says, at your first book signing, he says, I want to be first in line. Not your wife, not your children, not your colleagues, your friends, me. He says, but I won $25 million from your federal government, and I'll buy a bunch of copies.
Again, there's that karma thing coming right around, right?
Yeah. Hey, why not? Okay. Yes, sir. You'll be first in line.
Are you working on any other books right now, Dan, or are you just kind of
I actually am. I had when I first started writing Shots in the Dark, my first book, it was kind of call it a dream of mine to write at least three books,
okay,
and have a 3-book set so that, they would fit into a nice cardboard holder. And, and one of the things I asked my publisher, Wild Blue Press, when Chasin's Run was getting ready to be published, I said, will the book be the same size as Shots in the Dark? Will they fit nicely into a 3-box set? And they said, yeah, they have a standardized size and print and format. So I am working on a 3rd book. I actually started it the day that Wild Blue Press agreed to publish Chasin's Run.
Okay.
I immediately jumped into it. Again, a Massachusetts flavor. And the content will be very interesting. It'll be one of those things where if you don't like the first chapter, move on, because you may like the second chapter. It's a variety, of different things about Massachusetts murders over the last 3 or 4 decades.
Okay. So let everybody know where they can find Chasin's Run if they're interested in.
The easiest way to do it, as I explained earlier, is to just type my name into Amazon. I do have a URL, but instead of trying to have people copy that down, type in my name, Daniel, Daniel, last name Zimmerman, Zimmerman, and I've tried it a few times. I come up right off the bat with the
it does
the 2
work.
books.
I've tried it too.
Yep, with the 2 books. There are a couple other authors out there named Daniel Zimmerman, but their books are kind of, lesser type books, and they kind of fall
true crime.
Yeah, they fall below me in the category. So my name will get you there.
Okay. Daniel Zimmerman, the book is called Chasin's Run. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I much appreciated it.
Want to join the rebels of the Sherpa-lution? Follow us at Sherpa-lution on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky.
Thank you so much for spending a little time here in True Crime Screening Room, and thank you so much to Daniel Zimmerman for spending a little time here as well. And I've included the link to purchase Chasin's Run in our show notes, so all you got to do is click there, and it'll take you to a very popular book site where you can purchase the book. Hey, on Saturdays, we do Sherpa Selects, and it is a collection of all of my favorite episodes from the first 7 seasons. So if you were wondering what the show sounded like in the early days and what were some of the fun interviews that I've done, you can check that out every Saturday. And you can also follow me on social media at Sherpa-lution on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, and TikTok. Yep, that's all of them. Until then, I guess I will see you next time with a new episode. Probably. Yeah. I don't know. Am I motivated? I think I'm motivated. Yes. I will see you next time. And viva la Sherpa-lution.
Thanks for listening to True Crime Screening Room. Subscribe to the show on podcast apps or the Sherpa-lution YouTube page. Until then, stay away from evil. And more important, viva la Sherpa-lution.